Morning, everyone. I do hope that you are all well. First of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyses needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Now, this is a quote from the inaugural address of the 32nd President of the United States of America, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He said it 87 years ago, but it sounds fresh and as if it could have been written just yesterday. Roosevelt has always been my favourite US president. He did the job for longer than anyone else before or after, and he took the country out of the Great Depression before leading it into the Second World War, as a result of which America abandoned its isolationist stance and started to lead the world. What a guy. The speech he gave in March 1933 is justly famous, and the quote above is equally famous. I've been thinking a lot about fear over the last week, what fear is, what it does, and how we handle it, both individually and as a society. Fear has certainly been part of our national consciousness for the last few months. The UK went into lockdown on the 23rd of March, some 52 days ago. However, we've been afraid of COVID-19 for a little bit longer than that. Fear has been a fantastically useful tool for the UK government. Think of all those public service announcements on the television and the radio. They did their job. Britain locked down with staggering effect. Remember, coronavirus is a national emergency, life-threatening for people of all ages, everywhere in the UK. To help save lives, stay home. This message quite rightly played on the fears of everyone in the country, and Britain stepped up, stayed home, and saved lives. Every human feels fear. There is no way that we can avoid it. We have evolved to be afraid. Humanity has survived and thrived, in part at least, because we get scared. Our ancestors, when running around the Neolithic swamps, would come across a saber-toothed tiger, and they either stayed very still, fright, or they legged it, flight. Both instincts were driven by fear, and it worked. No doubt there were some who thought, what a pretty cat. I wonder if it would like to play. Those people don't have any descendants. Our bodies react in a particular way when we get afraid. We breathe more quickly. Our heart rate increases. Our muscles fill with blood because they're ready to react. Our muscles also become tighter, including those at the base of each of our hairs, which causes what we know as goosebumps. Having your hair stand on end, if you're a very hairy animal, makes you look bigger, and so you might scare away any predators. Doesn't quite work as well for humans, but we still do it. The bit of your brain that controls fear is your amygdala. It is part of one of the oldest sections of our brain, the limbic system. This regulates our biological functions in line with our mood. When something scares us, information about whatever it is gets sent to our amygdala, and it triggers a fight or flight response. It means we can act incredibly quickly when threatened by something scary. If you're walking along a path and a snake were to slither out in front of you, your body and brain don't waste any time trying to reason whether a snake is seriously risky. Your amygdala simply says, nope, I know those, they're dangerous. So you either stay very still or you run away. Humans have evolved to have things to regulate this flight or fight response. We have our hippocampus and our prefrontal cortex. The hippocampus is called that because it looks a little like a seahorse, and hippocampus is the Greek name for seahorse. The hippocampus, like the amygdala, is part of our limbic system, so the older part of our brain, in evolutionary terms. It helps us to evaluate stuff. For modern, evolved humans, though, it is the prefrontal cortex that helps us to control fear and to rationalise it. Let's talk about phobias. Now, a phobia is often classed as an irrational fear of something that, more often than not, cannot actually cause harm. The most famous phobia is probably arachnophobia, fear of spiders. Now, I don't like spiders at all. The one thing that will make me jump out of my skin is when I lift up a book or a paper and I find a spider underneath it. I will, and I'll admit this freely to you now, scream and jump a few foot in the air. However, I'm not arachnophobic. Once I've gotten over the shock of seeing the spider, I can place it outside and get on with my day. People who are truly arachnophobic can be paralysed by the fear of it. They can suffer panic attacks and they can even faint. In extreme cases, even a picture of a spider can cause them intense fear. So when scientists have studied people with proper phobias, they find that their amygdala, that primitive bit of our brain, goes off like a firecracker in response to the stimuli. Perhaps most interestingly though, they found that there is a disconnect between those people's amygdala and their prefrontal cortex. In short, the bit of their brain that can reason doesn't talk to the bit of their brain that makes them scared. They can't turn off the primitive bit of their brain. There are a lot of different sorts of phobias. Other phobias in the UK's top 10 include coulrophobia, which is a fear of clowns. The most common phobia in the UK, though, is acrophobia, a fear of heights, which is often mistakenly called vertigo. I quite like nyctophobia, which is a fear of the dark, and surely a common fear among most young children. However, as you get older, you tend to conquer that fear, and so it doesn't become a phobia, a paralysing thing. I remember when I started to enjoy being out in the dark. Typically that was on military exercises. And I thought of Beowulf, where the monster Grendel is described as a shadow walker, or Shia the Gun in Anglo-Saxon. I began to like being out in the pitch black. My prefrontal cortex had taken over and I wasn't scared anymore. Think about the whole concept of horror. As a society, we love horror. We thoroughly enjoy the jump scares in movies and the whole idea that things go bump in the night. I remember as a teenager reading Dracula alone in my grandparents' house and not getting to sleep until I'd finished it. My walk to bed in the wee small hours was terrifying. My amygdala was scared and saw vampires around every corner. Still, my prefrontal cortex must have been working okay because I made it up the stairs. Think about a good horror film and how that plays on our fears. I still remember the first time I watched the film Halloween on Halloween in the mid-90s. There were continual jump scares and a spooky bad guy. The thing that triggered my fears the most though was this music. The score was utterly terrifying, and it still is. I love horror movies. I love surrendering my amygdala to the fear, safe in the knowledge that my prefrontal cortex is going to look after me in the end, and that there really isn't anything to worry about. Is there? At the moment though, it feels like the country's collective amygdalae are struggling to break away from fear. Roosevelt said in his speech that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He was talking about an economic depression though, not about a virus which has killed tens of thousands of people in our country and hundreds of thousands across the world. Many politicians and political commentators have compared the fight against coronavirus to a war. It is probably fair to say that wars are easy to start and very hard to stop. The first question for any politician thinking about starting a war, even a war against an aggressive pathogen, is how do you stop that war? When you're fighting a war against a virus, that's really hard. In the 1984 film The Terminator, we are told that Arnold Schwarzenegger's killer cyborg can't be reasoned with. It can't be bargained with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever. That's what a virus is like. We know that a vaccine is probably the only way to reach absolute victory in this war, and we have no idea when or even if that vaccine might arrive. So what can we do? The UK locked down because of fear, but it is rapidly becoming clear that using fear as a motivator has a long-lasting effect that is difficult to shake. As a society, many people are still afraid, and why wouldn't they be? 50 odd days of messages telling you one thing aren't going to be washed away simply by staying alert. This week, the government announced plans for some students in some school years to be able to return to school in a socially distant fashion from June the 1st. We know that this is going to be hard. There have been a lot of noises from some politicians and some unions as to how we must wait for the science to dictate what we should do. Unfortunately, we know that the science isn't clear, that it isn't definitive. The choices that all governments have had to make in relation to this crisis are imperfect. The choices that they ask all of us to make will equally be imperfect. The next line in Roosevelt's speech, written 87 years ago, don't forget, is as follows. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and of vigour has met with the understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory. Back to that war analogy. I'm not sure that we've yet got frankness and vigour from today's politicians. Roosevelt also spoke of the need for bold, persistent experimentation, for governments to try something. He said that the millions will not stand by silently forever while the things to satisfy their needs are within easy reach. Now, I don't think that the answers to the coronavirus, even just in the realm of education, are within easy reach. I am confident, though, that great schools, like Prior Park, will try things. They will experiment with what works, and they will do the best for the young people that they serve. We are all still afraid, but we will have to gradually allow our prefrontal cortexes to take over, to reason and to weigh up the risks we all face. We will need courage to overcome our fears, and I ask you to pray with me the prayer of Reinhold Niebuhr. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.